I'm Freya, 34 female. I live in a minimalist apartment downtown that overlooks the city skyline, a view I paid for with years of relentless work and sacrifice. I'm the founder of a real estate investment firm, a life I built from nothing after my own family showed me that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. It took me a long time to understand that their version of love was conditional, tied to my ability to fit into a mold they had created for me. This story is about the moment I finally broke that mold, not with anger or tears, but with a quiet, devastating truth delivered over a Thanksgiving turkey. It's about how I discovered the ultimate betrayal and used that pain to build an empire, leading to a single sentence that would dismantle my mother's world. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up in my parents' house was like living in a meticulously curated museum of unmet expectations. My mother, Eleanor, a retired school principal, ran our home with the same rigid authority she used to run her elementary school. Every grade, every decision, every hobby was subject to her intense scrutiny. My father, Richard, an accountant by trade, was the silent enforcer. He didn't raise his voice, but his quiet sighs of disapproval and the way he'd meticulously review my report cards, his lips pursed in a thin line, were just as loud. He saw the world in black and white, profit and loss, and I always felt like I was an investment that was failing to yield the expected returns. Then there was my brother, Ethan. He was the golden child, the sun around which my parents' world orbited. He was 4 years younger, effortlessly charming and athletically gifted. Where I was quiet and studious, Ethan was loud and popular. He could flash a winning smile, and any minor transgression would be instantly forgiven. His C+ average was celebrated as him just not applying himself, while my A- was met with a stern lecture about the one question I got wrong. "It's about perfection, Freya," my mother would say, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Anything less is a step toward failure." Their vision for me was clear and unyielding. I was to become a doctor or a lawyer, a respectable, stable profession with a predictable trajectory. It was a safe bet, a blue-chip stock in their portfolio of children. My interest in business, in the dynamic world of markets and investments, was dismissed as a childish fantasy. "That's a man's world," my father would state, not unkindly, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "You need security, a pension, not this gambling." I remember one dinner vividly when I was 17. I had just won a regional business competition for a mock investment portfolio I had built. I was buzzing with excitement, clutching the small trophy in my hands as I walked into the dining room. Ethan had just come home from soccer practice, muddy and triumphant after scoring the winning goal. He was regaling them with the story, and they were hanging on his every word, their faces lit up with pride. I waited for a lull in the conversation, my heart pounding, and finally said, "I have some news, too. I won the statewide decathlon, the business portion." My mother turned to me, her smile faltering slightly. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Is that for extra credit?" "No, it was a competition. I beat students from 50 other schools," I explained, my voice shrinking under her indifferent gaze. My father chimed in, adjusting his glasses. "Well, don't let it distract you from your calculus homework. That's what matters for your pre-med applications." Ethan, meanwhile, had their full attention again. "So then, the coach said I have a real shot at a scholarship," he announced. A fresh wave of praise washed over him, and my small victory was forgotten, a tiny, insignificant footnote in the grand story of the Golden Sun. I remember looking at my little trophy, the plastic gleam feeling cheap and foolish under the warm dining room lights. It felt like I was screaming in a soundproof room. They could see my lips moving, but they couldn't or wouldn't hear the sound. This dynamic continued for years. I went to college and, to their immense disappointment, majored in finance. Every phone call home was a subtle interrogation. "Are you sure about this, Freya? It's not too late to switch to biology," my mother would suggest. "Your cousin just got into law school. Her parents are so proud." The comparisons were relentless. Ethan, who had indeed gotten a partial athletic scholarship to a state school, was their shining star. They bragged about his potential to anyone who would listen. They helped him with a down payment on a flashy new car he couldn't afford and co-signed for an apartment near campus. Meanwhile, IW worked 3 part-time jobs to avoid taking on excessive student loans, a fact they saw not as a sign of responsibility, but as proof that my chosen path was unstable. My independence was framed as a failure. "If you had chosen a real career, we would have supported you more," my father once said during a tense holiday visit. "But we can't throw good money after bad." The message was always the same. Ethan was the future, and I was the liability. He was the one they would invest in, the one they would brag about. I was the one who had strayed, the disappointment who refused to listen to reason. I learned early on to stop sharing my successes with them. My Dean's List certificates were tucked away in a folder, my internship offers accepted without a celebratory phone call home. I was building a life for myself, brick by painful brick, in a world they refused to acknowledge. The constant echo of their disapproval became the background noise of my life. It was a hum I grew so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore. But it was always there, a reminder that in their eyes, I would never be enough. It was this echo that fueled me, that pushed me to work harder, to prove them wrong not for their sake, but for my own. I had to show myself that my worth wasn't determined by their validation. And I promised myself that one day, I would be so successful that their voices would be nothing more than a distant, irrelevant whisper. After graduating with honors, I landed a competitive job at a top-tier investment firm in the city. The hours were brutal, the pressure was immense, but I thrived on it. For the first time, I was in an environment where my skills were valued, where my ambition wasn't seen as a character flaw. I was learning from the best, absorbing every piece of information like a sponge. I started with a meager salary and lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, but I was meticulously saving every penny I could. My goal was to leave the corporate world behind and start my own real estate investment company. I had a vision, a strategy, and an unshakable belief in my ability to succeed. Around this time, when I was 25, my parents announced they were planning to sell my childhood home. The market was booming, and they wanted to downsize to a smaller condo and invest the profit for their retirement. However, there was a problem. The house, while structurally sound, was dated. The kitchen had Formica countertops from the 70s, the bathrooms were a symphony of avocado green tile, and the whole place needed a significant facelift to command the price they wanted. My father, in his typical risk-averse fashion, was hesitant to take out a home equity loan for the renovations. "Too much debt," he'd mutter. "What if the market turns?" My mother, on the other hand, was desperate to keep up with her friends who were all moving into luxurious new builds. This was my chance, I thought. My opportunity to finally prove my worth, to show them that my financial acumen was real and valuable. I spent weeks putting together a detailed proposal. I researched contractors, priced out materials, and created a budget that outlined the exact cost of a full kitchen and bathroom remodel, new flooring, and a professional paint job. The total came to $40,000. I calculated that this investment would increase the home's value by at least $100,000, a significant return. I presented it to them one Sunday evening. My father scrutinized the spreadsheet, his brow furrowed. My mother just saw the shiny new appliances in the brochures I'd brought. "Freya," my father said slowly, "this is a lot of money. Where are you getting this from?" I took a deep breath. "It's my savings. I've been putting money aside since I started working. I want to give it to you, not as a loan, but as a gift. It's my contribution, my way of thanking you for everything." In truth, it was everything I had. It was my seed money, my dream of starting my own business, the sum total of years of sacrifice, of saying no to vacations with friends and living on instant noodles. But the look of stunned surprise on their faces felt worth it. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of pride in my father's eyes. My mother was already talking about granite countertops. They agreed. I transferred the entire $40,000 to my father's bank account. It was a terrifying moment, watching my own dreams drain away with a click of a button, but I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I had finally done something they could understand and appreciate. I had provided tangible, monetary value. The renovations began, and for a while everything seemed fine. My mother would call me, giddy with excitement, to describe the new stainless steel refrigerator or the subway tile backsplash. I felt included, a part of the family in a way I never had before. A few months later, the house was finished and put on the market. It sold within a week for even more than my projected increase. I felt a surge of pride. I had done it. I had made them a significant amount of money and proven my financial skills. Then things got strange. I had assumed that with the huge profit from the sale, they would offer to pay me back, even though I had insisted it was a gift. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the acknowledgement of my contribution. But the call never came. When I visited them in their new, upscale condo, they showed me all the expensive furniture they had bought. They talked about the cruise they had booked to celebrate. There was no mention of the $40,000. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to ask. I tried to be casual about it. "So, the house sale went well," I started. "I'm glad my investment paid off for you." My father looked up from his newspaper, a blank expression on his face. "What investment?" My heart stuttered. "The $40,000 I gave you for the renovations. It really boosted the sale price." My mother walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She had a strange, defensive look on her face. "Freya, we were very grateful for that money, but it was hardly an investment. It was your duty to help your parents. Besides, that money went to your brother." I stared at her, utterly confused. "What are you talking about? What does Ethan have to do with this?" Elinor sighed, as if I were a particularly slow child. "Ethan was having some trouble, dear. He had some debts he needed to clear up. You know how he is with money. He needed it more than a house did. Your father and I decided it was for the best to help him get back on his feet." The room started to spin. They had taken my life savings, the money I had sacrificed everything for, and had given it to my brother to pay off his debts without even telling me. It wasn't for the renovations. It wasn't for the family's future. It was another handout for the golden child, funded by the daughter they had always dismissed. You gave him my money?" I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. My father folded his newspaper deliberately. "It was our money to do with as we saw fit, Freya. You gave it to us as a gift, and we decided the best use for it was to help your brother. Family helps family." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I, who had worked tirelessly and lived frugally, had my sacrifice casually handed over to my irresponsible brother, who had never known a day of real financial struggle because they were always there to bail him out. The warmth I had felt was gone, replaced by an icy cold that spread through my entire body. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete and utter disregard for me, for my dreams, for my sacrifice. I was not a daughter to them. I was a resource, a line of credit to be used for their favored son. That was the moment something inside me shattered. The naive hope that I could ever earn their love and respect died a swift and brutal death. And in its place, something new and hard began to grow. The initial shock of their confession curdled into a cold, quiet rage. I left their condo that night without another word. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and silent, hot tears. They hadn't just given away my money. They had lied to me, manipulated me, and used my desire for their approval as a weapon against me. The story about the renovations had been a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed play to extract my life savings for their precious son. When I got home, I collapsed onto my couch, the reality of the situation washing over me in waves. Every memory of my mother's excited phone calls about tile samples and cabinet finishes was now tainted. It was all a performance. How much of it was a lie? Did they use any of the money on the house? Or did it all go straight to Ethan? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. My best friend, Maya, a corporate lawyer with a mind as sharp as a razor, came over the next day after I called her, my voice trembling. I laid out the whole sordid story, from the investment proposal to the devastating reveal. Maya listened patiently, her expression growing harder with every detail. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or comforting hugs. She got practical. "Okay," she said, her tone all business. "First, we need to separate emotion from fact. You gave them the money as a gift, which means legally you have no recourse. It's gone. But that doesn't mean we can't find out exactly what happened. Knowledge is power, Freya. Right now, you're operating in the dark." She was right. The anger was a blinding fog, but I needed clarity. I needed to know the full extent of their deception. "Where do I even start?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You start with the crumbs," Maya said. "People, especially people who think they're clever, always leave crumbs. You said they sold the house. It's a public record. Let's start there." That weekend, Maya and I spent hours online, digging through public property records. We found the listing for my old house. The photos showed a home that was exactly as I remembered it. The same dated kitchen. The same avocado green tiles in the bathroom. The carpets looked freshly cleaned, and the walls had a new coat of paint, but the major renovations I had funded had never happened. They hadn't spent a dime of my money on the house. It was the first concrete piece of evidence, a cold, hard confirmation of their lie. The sale price was also telling. It was significantly lower than the appraised value they could have gotten with the upgrades. They had been so eager to get their hands on the cash for Ethan that they had left at least $50,000 of potential profit on the table. It was a stupid financial decision, driven by desperation and favoritism. This fact, more than anything, chipped away at the image of my father as a shrewd, careful accountant. He was just as blinded by his favoritism as my mother. The next crumb was Ethan. If they had given him $40,000, what did he do with it? My brother was not exactly subtle. He lived his life on social media, curating an image of a successful, high-flying personal trainer. I opened his Instagram profile, something I rarely did, and began to scroll back through the months following my gift. And there it was. Just a few weeks after I had transferred the money, Ethan's feed exploded with new content. There was a photo of him grinning in front of a brand-new, top-of-the-line sports car, not the sensible sedan a struggling personal trainer would buy. There were posts from a lavish, 2-week vacation to Thailand, complete with 5-star hotels and pictures of him on a yacht. Then came the pictures of his new, expensive apartment in a trendy part of the city, filled with designer furniture. He had captioned one photo, "Hard work pays off. Entrepreneur grind." I felt sick to my stomach. My hard work, my grind, my sacrifice had paid for his carefree lifestyle, his social media facade. He was flaunting the life that my money had bought him, all while my parents were feeding me a story about him being in trouble. This wasn't a bailout. This was a lifestyle upgrade, bankrolled by me. But there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. Why were they in such a rush to sell the house? Why the sudden financial pressure? My father had a stable job, and their mortgage should have been close to paid off. It didn't quite add up. I started thinking about my parents' spending habits. My mother had always been obsessed with appearances. She had to have the nicest car, the latest clothes, the membership at the local country club. My father, while outwardly frugal, never denied her anything. On a hunch, I did a search of county court records for any civil suits or liens against them. At first, nothing came up. But Maya, with her legal research skills, suggested trying different search parameters. And then, we found it. It wasn't under their names directly, but under the name of a small, defunct LLC my father had set up years ago for some side hustle accounting work. There was a judgment against the LLC from a major credit card company for nearly $60,000 in unpaid debt. The timeline showed they had been racking up charges for years, living far beyond their means to maintain that perfect suburban image. Attached to the judgment was a lien against their property, my childhood home. They weren't just downsizing to free up cash for retirement, they were being forced to sell. They were on the brink of financial collapse, and the lien had to be paid off from the proceeds of the sale before they saw a penny. They were desperate. My $40,000 hadn't just been for Ethan. It was likely used to plug other holes in their sinking financial ship, to keep up appearances just a little longer. The final piece clicked into place. The lies, the manipulation, the favoritism, it was all woven together in a tapestry of deceit, narcissism, and shocking financial irresponsibility. They had sacrificed my future to patch up their past and fund my brother's present. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had been lying to everyone, including themselves, for years. The crumbs hadn't just led me to the truth, they had led me to a complete and devastating picture of who my parents truly were. And armed with that knowledge, the grief I felt began to harden into something else entirely: resolve. The discovery of my parents' secret debt and the property lien changed everything. It was no longer a simple story of them favoring my brother. It was a complex web of financial mismanagement, pride, and deep-seated deception. They hadn't just lied to me, they were living a lie. The pressure they were under must have been immense, but instead of coming clean or asking for help honestly, they chose to manipulate and sacrifice. Their own daughter, that was the part that cut the deepest. I spent the next few days in a daze, processing the information. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but it was now accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. For my entire life, I had been chasing the approval of people who were fundamentally dishonest. Their judgments of my career path, my life choices, it all came from a place of fear and hypocrisy. They criticized my risky ambitions while their own safe life was crumbling around them. Maya was my rock during this time. We sat in her office late one night, the city lights twinkling below, and mapped out everything we knew on a whiteboard. It looked like a conspiracy board from a detective movie. My name connected to the $40,000 transfer, which then branched out to Ethan's car and vacation, and to my parents' credit card judgment and the house lien. Seeing it all laid out visually made it feel horrifyingly real. "So what now?" I asked, staring at the board. "I can't confront them. They'll just lie more, gaslight me, and tell me I'm being ungrateful." "You're right," Maya said, tapping a marker against the board. "A direct confrontation gives them control of the narrative. You need to take control. But to do that, you need more than just public records. You need irrefutable proof, something that connects all these dots in their own words." Her words sparked an idea, a risky and morally ambiguous one, but I was past the point of caring about playing fair. "My father is meticulous about records," I said slowly, thinking aloud. "He's an accountant. He never throws anything away. He used to have an old desktop computer in his home office, the one in their new condo. He uses it for all his personal financial stuff, spreadsheets, bank statements, tax records. I bet everything is on there." "And how are you going to get access to that?" Maya asked, raising an eyebrow. "My mother's birthday is next month," I said. "They always throw a small party. They'll expect me to be there. If I play the part of the dutiful, forgiving daughter, I might be able to get a few minutes alone in his office." The plan felt deceitful, and a part of me recoiled from the idea of stooping to their level. But they had left me no choice. I needed to protect myself from any future manipulation, and to do that, I needed to understand the full scope of their financial situation. For the next few weeks, I put on an Oscar-worthy performance. I started calling my mother again, keeping the conversations light and superficial. I apologized for being emotional and distant, blaming it on stress from work. She eagerly accepted my apology, her relief palpable. To her, it meant the problem was solved, and her perfect family image could be restored. I even sent her an expensive bouquet of flowers for her birthday, a gesture that earned me a gushing phone call. When the day of her birthday party arrived, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I walked into their condo armed with a gift bag and a small, encrypted USB drive hidden in my pocket. The party was a small affair, just a few of their close friends, and of course, Ethan. He greeted me with a condescending smirk. "Look who decided to show up," he said. "Finally done with your little tantrum?" I just smiled sweetly and wished my mother a happy birthday. I spent the first hour making small talk, playing my role. I watched my parents as they mingled, laughing and telling stories. They were masters of illusion, projecting an image of comfortable, retired bliss. No one would ever suspect the financial storm raging just beneath the surface. My opportunity came when my mother started opening her gifts in the living room. Everyone's attention was focused on her. "I think I left my phone in the car," I announced quietly to Maya, who I had brought along for moral support and as a lookout. "I'll be right back." I slipped away down the hall to my father's office. The door was slightly ajar. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The room was just as I expected, neat, orderly, with files stacked in perfect piles. The old desktop computer was humming quietly in the corner. I sat down, took a deep breath, and turned on the monitor. It was password protected, of course. I tried a few common guesses: my mom's birthday, their anniversary. Nothing. Then I remembered something. My father was obsessed with the concept of a legacy. He was always talking about what he would leave behind for Ethan. I typed in Ethan legacy, followed by his birth year. The screen flickered and opened to the desktop. I was in. My hands trembled as I navigated through his files. It was all there, laid out in neat folders. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents. It was a treasure trove of deception. I found the statements detailing the $60,000 debt spread across multiple high-interest credit cards. There were charges for country club fees, designer clothes, and expensive dinners that went back years. I found a folder labeled Family Loans. Inside was a spreadsheet. My eyes scanned the entries until I found my name. Next to it was the $40,000 amount, dated the day I transferred the money. The description read, "Freya's contribution." But the money hadn't been deposited into their main checking account. I cross-referenced the bank statements and found the deposit in a separate savings account. And then I saw the withdrawals. The very next day, a check was written to Ethan for $25,000. The memo line read, "New car debt." A week after that, another $10,000 was transferred to his account, labeled vacation. The remaining $5,000 from my gift was used to pay down the most urgent of their credit card bills, just enough to keep the collectors at bay until the house sale went through. But the most damning piece of evidence was in a subfolder labeled Correspondence. I found a saved email chain between my mother and father from the week before I offered them the money. My mother was panicking about a final notice they had received from one of the credit card companies. My father's reply was chillingly clinical. He wrote, "Eleanor, calm down. I have a plan. Freya has been doing well at her job. She is desperate for our approval. I will mention the house needing renovations. We will frame it as an opportunity for her to invest in the family. Her desire to prove herself is our most valuable asset right now. We can solve Ethan's issues and get some breathing room." I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just a spontaneous, bad decision. It was a premeditated, calculated scheme. They had targeted my deepest emotional vulnerability, my lifelong yearning for their acceptance, and had exploited it for their own gain. I was not their daughter. I was an asset to be leveraged. I quickly copied the entire Family Loans folder, the email correspondence, and the relevant bank statements onto my encrypted USB drive. I deleted the recent history from the browser and shut down the computer, my mind a maelstrom of pain and fury. I slipped out of the office and back into the party, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. As my mother held up a cashmere sweater Ethan had given her, exclaiming, "Oh, Ethan, it's beautiful, you shouldn't have," I caught my father's eye from across the room. He gave me a small, dismissive nod, completely oblivious to the fact that I now held the key to their entire charade. I had connected all the dots, and the picture they formed was uglier than I could have ever imagined. The game had changed. They thought they had won, but they had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. Leaving my parents' condo that evening, with the USB drive feeling like a lead weight in my pocket, I was a different person. The last vestiges of hope for a healthy relationship with my family had been extinguished. The pain of their betrayal was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard clarity. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. The drive home was silent. Maya, sensing the gravity of what I had discovered, didn't press me for details. When we got back to my apartment, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop, and we reviewed the files together. Maya's legal mind immediately saw the patterns of fraud and emotional manipulation. "Freya, it's sociopathic," she said, her voice low. "The coldness of that email, they discussed you like a mark in a con." "So what do I do with it?" I asked, my voice flat. "Do I confront them? Do I send it to Ethan? What's the point? They'll just deny it." "No," Maya said firmly. "You do nothing. For now, this is your leverage. This is your insurance policy. You don't play this card until the stakes are high enough and you can guarantee a win. An emotional outburst gets you nothing. A strategic move wins the war." Her words resonated with me. My parents operated in a world of emotion and manipulation. To beat them, I had to operate in a world of logic, strategy, and silence. So I made a decision. I would sever the emotional ties, but I would maintain a superficial connection. I would continue to play the part of the dutiful daughter, but on my own terms. I would visit on major holidays, send birthday cards, and keep phone calls brief and impersonal. I was building a wall around myself, one they wouldn't even see until it was too late. At the same time, I poured all of that betrayed energy into my work. The $40,000 they had stolen was meant to be my seed capital. Now, without it, I had to be smarter, faster, and more relentless. I left my comfortable corporate job and took a massive risk, founding my own company, Phoenix Holdings, a name that felt deeply personal. I started small, using my own meager savings and a small business loan I fought tooth and nail. L4. My first few years were a grueling blur of 18-hour days. I lived and breathed real estate. I developed a niche strategy, finding undervalued, distressed commercial properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods that other investors overlooked. I would research zoning laws, city development plans, and demographic shifts with a singular focus. While other investors were chasing trendy residential flips, I was buying dilapidated warehouses and forgotten storefronts. My first big success was a rundown auto body shop on the edge of a neighborhood that was just beginning to gentrify. I bought it for a pittance, convinced the city council to rezone it for mixed-use development, and then sold the property to a developer for 5 times what I paid. That one deal gave me the capital I needed to scale up. Slowly and quietly, I started building my empire. Phoenix Holdings grew from a one-woman operation working out of my tiny apartment to a small, agile firm with a handful of dedicated employees. I was making a name for myself, but I kept a deliberately low profile. I didn't want my family to know the extent of my success. To them, I was still just Freya, who works in real estate. Whenever they asked how work was going, I would give vague, modest answers. "It's going okay." "Keeping busy." They assumed okay meant I was barely scraping by, which fit their narrative of my poor life choices. Their ignorance was my greatest shield. During this time, their own financial situation continued to deteriorate. The sale of their house had only been a temporary fix. They had bought a condo that was still too expensive for their means, and my mother's spending habits didn't change. Ethan was a constant drain, always needing money for a new business venture that never materialized or to cover his rent. I would hear about it through the family grapevine, relayed by my mother in hushed, dramatic tones, always ending with a hint that I should be contributing more. I would simply reply with a noncommittal, "I hope things work out for him." About 5 years after the betrayal, I heard they were in trouble again. My father had been forced into early retirement from his accounting firm due to downsizing. His pension was less than he had expected, and their extravagant lifestyle was now completely unsustainable. They had taken out a reverse mortgage on their condo to stay afloat, a desperate move that I knew was the beginning of the end. That's when I saw my opening. It was a long shot, but the seeds of a plan began to form in my mind. It was audacious and complex, but it was the perfect culmination of everything I had built. My parents' condo was part of a larger building managed by a homeowners association, which in turn was managed by a larger property management company. I began my research. The property management company was a regional, mid-sized firm. I looked into their financials, their portfolio, and their leadership. I discovered they were over-leveraged and had been struggling since the last economic downturn. Through a series of discreet inquiries via my network, I learned they were quietly looking for a buyout. Using Phoenix Holdings, I created a new subsidiary, a shell corporation with an innocuous name, Northwood Property Group. It was completely insulated from my primary company, with no public connection to me whatsoever. Over the next 6 months, I had my lawyers, led by Maya, begin negotiations to acquire the struggling property management firm. It was the biggest deal of my career, a move that would elevate my company to a whole new level. The deal was finalized in early October. Overnight, Phoenix Holdings, through its subsidiary Northwood, became the owner and manager of dozens of properties across the state, including the condominium building where my parents lived. They had no idea. A few weeks later, as planned, Northwood Property Group sent out a standard, form letter notice to all residents in their newly acquired buildings. The letter stated that due to rising operational costs and a portfolio review, homeowner association fees would be increasing by 15% at the start of the new year. It also notified residents that the board would be strictly enforcing all bylaws, including those related to late payments, which would now incur significant penalties and could lead to foreclosure proceedings. I knew that a 15% increase would be a devastating blow to my parents. It was a move designed to push their already precarious finances over the edge. I was no longer just watching their downfall. I was now its silent architect. The girl whose life savings they had stolen to stay afloat was now the unseen force that controlled the roof over their heads. And Thanksgiving was just around the corner. The annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' condo was a tradition I had come to dread, but this year I felt a calm, steady sense of purpose as I drove over. I had spent the last decade rebuilding my life from the ashes of their betrayal, and today was the day I would finally close that chapter. I wasn't seeking an apology or a tearful reconciliation. I was seeking the quiet satisfaction of justice. I walked in carrying a bottle of expensive wine, a peace offering that was really a prop. The atmosphere in the condo was already tense. My father, Richard, looked grayer and more stooped than I had ever seen him. He was trying to watch football, but his gaze kept drifting to a pile of bills on the side table. My mother, Eleanor, was fluttering around the kitchen, her movements jerky and her smile stretched thin. Her usual air of imperious control had been replaced by a brittle anxiety. Ethan was there, of course, lounging on their new leather sofa, another financially ruinous purchase, I was sure, and scrolling through his phone. He grunted a hello in my direction. "Heard you're still playing with houses," he said, not looking up. "You ever going to get a real job?" "Something like that," I replied smoothly, setting the wine on the counter. My mother swooped in. "Freya, thank you for coming. We have some wonderful news. Ethan is starting a new wellness brand. He's going to be a CEO." I looked at Ethan, who was now admiring his own reflection in his phone's black screen. The CEO of a company that likely consisted of an Instagram page and zero revenue. I just nodded. "That's great. I hope it goes well." Dinner was a masterclass in denial. My parents talked about their friends, the weather, and the disappointing performance of a local sports team, anything to avoid the suffocating financial elephant in the room. I could feel the desperation radiating from them. They were trying to project an image of normalcy that was cracking at the seams. The breaking point came during dessert. My father, after 2 large glasses of wine, finally let his guard down. "Can you believe this new company that bought our building?" He grumbled to no one in particular. "Slapping us with a huge fee increase right before the holidays. It's criminal." My mother shot him a panicked look, but the dam had broken. "It's more than we can handle, Richard," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I don't know what we're going to do." She then turned her glare on me, her anxiety curdling into her default emotion: blame. "This is exactly why we told you to go into a stable profession, Freya," she said, her voice rising. A doctor or a lawyer. You'd have a good salary. You could be helping us right now instead of whatever it is you do. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, remaining silent. My calmness seemed to infuriate her even more. "Look at you," she spat, her face contorted with a decade's worth of resentment. "Sitting there so smug, you have no idea what real responsibility is. We sacrificed everything for you and your brother. We gave you everything. Without us, you'd be nothing." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was the same line she had used my whole life, the ultimate tool to induce guilt and reinforce my dependency. But it had lost its power. My father nodded in agreement, his face grim. "Your mother is right. We've had some bad luck, but you've never once offered to help the family that raised you." Ethan chimed in, finally looking up from his phone. "Yeah, Freya, it's always all about you. Some of us actually care about Mom and Dad." This from the man whose lifestyle I had personally, albeit unknowingly, funded. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. Elinor stared at me, her chest heaving. "We are on the verge of losing this place, our home, and you just sit there with that little smile on your face." I hadn't realized I was smiling, but she was right. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of finality. A quiet acknowledgement that the moment I had been working towards had finally arrived. "What's so funny?" she demanded, her voice screeching. "What could you possibly find amusing about your family's suffering?" I carefully placed my wine glass on the table. I looked from my mother's furious face to my father's defeated one, and finally to my brother's smug sneer. I held their gazes, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of the emotion she had expected. "Because, Mom," I said slowly, "the company that just bought your building, the one that raised your fees, Northwood Property Group, is owned by me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Ethan's jaw literally dropped. My father's face went slack, his skin turning a pasty white. He looked like he might be having a heart attack. But my mother's reaction was the one I will never forget. Her furious, self-righteous expression melted away, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning horror, and finally, utter devastation. The color drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The power dynamic of our entire relationship, the foundation of her identity as the matriarch in control, had crumbled to dust in a single sentence. That's not possible," she whispered, her voice a hoarse croak. "You're lying." "Am I?" I replied, my voice still even. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a copy of the acquisition announcement, listing Phoenix Holdings as the parent company of Northwood, with my name clearly printed at the bottom. Freya Anderson, founder and CEO. I slid it across the table. My father fumbled to pick it up, his hands shaking so violently he could barely read it. He stared at it, then looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. He finally understood. They all finally understood. The daughter they had dismissed, devalued, and stolen from was not the failure they had painted her to be. She was their landlord. She was their banker. She held their entire future in the palm of her hand. The nothing they claimed I would be without them had just become their everything. The aftermath of my revelation was not loud or explosive. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. My father slumped in his chair, staring at the paper in his hands as if it were a death sentence. Ethan, for the first time in his life, looked utterly lost, his usual arrogance replaced by a wide-eyed fear. He was realizing that the family bank he had been withdrawing from his entire life was now owned by the sibling he had always treated with contempt. But it was my mother, Elinor, who truly broke. She sank back into her chair, all the fight gone out of her. She looked smaller, older, and incredibly fragile. The formidable principal, the matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist, was gone. In her place was a scared old woman who had just realized she had lost a game she never even knew she was playing. I didn't stay to watch the pieces settle. There was nothing left to say. I stood up from the table, my movements calm and deliberate. "Thank you for dinner," I said to the room at large. "I'll see myself out." No one moved. No one spoke. As I walked out of the condo and closed the door behind me, I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't the triumphant, fist-pumping victory I might have imagined as a younger woman. It was a quiet, solemn severing of a toxic bond. I had not destroyed them with rage. I had simply presented them with the consequences of their own actions. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was deafening. I received no angry phone calls, no desperate pleas, no demands for an explanation. It was as if they had ceased to exist. I later found out through Maya, whose legal firm handled the property management side of my business, that they paid their increased fees on time. The payment came not from their account, but from Ethan's. It seemed my brother was finally being forced to contribute, the flow of free money having been abruptly cut off. About 2 months after that Thanksgiving, I received a formal, typed letter in the mail. It was from my father. It was not an apology, not really. He was incapable of that. But it was an admission. He wrote that he had reviewed his past financial decisions and acknowledged his errors in judgment. He stated that he and my mother would be selling the condo, as it was no longer financially viable for them. He ended the letter by saying they would be moving to a small rental apartment in a less expensive town a few hours away, to be closer to Ethan. There was no warmth, no remorse, just a stark statement of facts. It was the most honest communication I had ever received from him. I never replied. A part of me sometimes wonders if I was too harsh, if the revenge was too cold. But then I remember the calculated cruelty of their deception. I remember them looking me in the eye and lying about the renovations. I remember reading that email where my father described my desire for their love as an asset to be leveraged. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a tool. My revenge was not about causing them pain for the sake of it. It was about taking back my power and showing them that I was not an asset to be liquidated. I was the CEO. I sold their condo building a year later as part of a larger portfolio deal, making a substantial profit. I never knew where they ended up, and I never tried to find out. My connection to them was severed, and I focused on building my own life on my own terms. My company, Phoenix Holdings, has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I've expanded into sustainable development, building communities, not just properties. I have a life filled with purpose, respect, and genuine relationships. Maya remains my closest friend and legal counsel. We often talk about that period of my life, not with anger, but with a sense of awe at how much can change. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who support you, who value you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. It's about building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. My parents and brother were the architects of their own downfall. All I did was hand them the invoice for the materials. They built a house of lies on a foundation of deceit, and when it inevitably collapsed, I was already living in a skyscraper built of truth, resilience, and self-worth, with a hell of a view.